Hello, this is Llewellyn Cox welcoming you to this Bite-Sized Bio web seminar. Today's presentation is titled Stress in the Lab, Common Pitfalls and How to Avoid Them, and is presented by Dr. Ian Street. Ian is a plant scientist working at Dartmouth on plant growth hormones. He started a blog as a space to openly talk about his own struggles with depression, anxiety, stress, and determining a healthy mindset for being a productive scientist, as well as a place to build a writing habit. You can visit his blog at postdocstreet.wordpress.com. The ultimate solution for Ian was finding scientifically grounded and positive voices that allowed him to change his mindset and invest more in himself. As always, we'll have a question and answer session after the presentation, so please type any questions you have into the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll give them to Ian at the end of the presentation. And so for now, over to Ian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Llewellyn, for the generous introduction, and thank you to Bite-Sized Bio for inviting me to present this webinar. So, as he said, I'm going to be talking about stress in the lab and common pitfalls and how to avoid them. As he also said, my name's Ian Street, and I'm a postdoc at Dartmouth. And if you want to follow me or continue the discussion later, my Twitter handle is at the lower right-hand side of the screen, and you can come follow me and interact with me there. So let's get started with stress in the lab. This is the tilde of my talk, or I guess this is the outline slide, right? The first thing that, I hope you take away is that stress happens to everybody and that you're not alone. I think that's the number one most important thing. The second big point is being able to effectively deal with uncertainty is really essential. And I know it can be hard for scientists that we are bred to find answers and concrete answers to what is the truth, capital T, of nature. The third point is that your bench experiments / your work and you are different. You are not your work, even though it may seem like it because you live in the lab. The solutions I'll talk about are easily stated but harder to implement. They are possible. It's just none of the things I'm going to talk about are light switch flipping on and you're there and you're cured and you're healed. Like, it's not magical thinking by any means. But the three big things are adopting a growth mindset, self-compassion, and something I'll explain more later, daring greatly. So as I said, a lot of this, it's easier said than done. Like, a lot of times, stressors are coming from outside of us and are completely out of our control. The only thing we can do and can work on is what our internal reactions are. And again, as I just said, it's not a panacea. It's not a cure-all, but it goes a long way to increasing our productivity and progress, and it builds resilience, which is a really good quality to have. It'll help you keep going. Again, I just want to reiterate this. I'll come back to this again and again. Like, changing deep-seated thought patterns can take years. So I thought I would start with this broad outline of where stress can come from, and some of it is based on just what scientists do. And in the ideal sense, it can be summed up in the opening to the series Star Trek, which I'm a big fan of. And if you're not familiar, this is the opening monologue that Captain Picard says at the beginning of every episode. And the most key part is bolded at the end, like, scientists to boldly go where no one has gone before. And that's what we're trying to do in whatever field we're in, right? I also adapted this monologue to make it a decent elevator pitch. Insert your discipline, and then whatever your experiment is, and whatever you're exploring, and then to boldly go. So it's a really quick elevator pitch. It's like, that's the ideal, that's what we want, that's what we want to do. In reality, we're trying to do creative experiments to generate new knowledge, and in practice, it involves all these things that are populating this word cloud right now. And it's a lot, right? We're expected to be really good at all of these different things and wear all these many hats. Depending on where you are in the academic tier, they can be different or more or less. And this is probably not at a complete list either. And more than ever, we're expected to do everything efficiently, quickly, confidently, competently, perfectly in parentheses, I might add. Having all that on us and dealing with all those inputs and things coming in from the outside can lead to stress. And what is stress exactly? Well, it can be a good thing, right? Stress is involved in things like building muscle, right? You stress out your muscles when you work out a little bit, and then they recover and grow back bigger and stronger than they were before. I know that's a very simplistic model for how muscle growth works, but it's true. Fight-flight response that, triggers a stress response in us is good when it's warranted. Like if a tiger's about to pounce on you, yes, that fight-flight stress response is exactly what you want to happen. Stress, in a more practical way, it can help you keep going to meet a deadline. If you're behind on something or if you need to really just finish a project, it can help you get the adrenaline rush to keep going and push through to the end. And, it can also, like if something's really stressing you out, it can be a motivating factor to solve that stressoring problem. And that's kind of what this webinar is about. But this webinar is also about stress gone wrong, which is what I went off the deep end with. And certainly I know I'm not by myself in this. Things like anxiety, like, the fight-flight response to completely inappropriate things. Like, social anxiety is quite common, but you can imagine other forms of anxiety, like burnout, like, the loss of motivation or joy in your work. Just trying to drag yourself to the end to finish, your dissertation or that manuscript. Depression, partly framed depression as burnout that lasts for months, years at a time. It is more than that too, and I'll get to that. Stress gone wrong can lead to isolation. It can lead to risk aversion, as in not boldly going, and you're probably not doing your best work if you're under a chronic stress environment. And, the last point, it can lead to analysis paralysis or perfectionism, right? You're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to figure out, you've got all the data. But you're not taking any action. You're not doing anything. You're just going through loops in your head, constantly thinking about them. Some of it comes down, like a lot of, stress these days is how are we supposed to succeed in life? And, you see these people where, you think, everything is great and like success is a straight arrow going up, like grad school, postdoc, PI, famous PI, National Academy member, Nobel laureate. Boom, you're done. However, what nobody really tells you or talks about often is that success really actually looks more like the second arrow with lots of detours and looped loops. And eventually some people climb out on the other end and are quite successful, but they had to go through the knots to get there. So I'll take you through my own personal story about how I used to think and how I think a lot more now that's more productive and better. Warning, this is a little, I might get a little emotional talking about this because it's not a good mental space to be in, and that's why. Imposter syndrome is something that's really common, and I certainly had it. Like, someone's literally going to find out I don't belong here. That's a big stressor for some people I know. The fixed mindset, being perfectionist, like constantly fiddling with little projects and experiments, and like no one can see it until I've got it perfect. I have to make it unassailable. That's how I protect myself. Like, I'll be harder on this thing before anyone else can come trash it / give me feedback / be mean about it to me. But that tends to not be very productive, right? You don't get a lot of output if you have that mindset. If you work to the exclusion of everything else, and that's certainly something that I did for many years, like I'll do those other life things when I'm actually successful, right? And whatever that means for me. Like I always had my heart set on an academic career, but now I'm not as certain of that. And then, of course, like another stressor is this fear of missing out, or the acronym is FOMO, F-O-M-O. And, this can happen to scientists because we're awash in information now. Like, the literature is a huge mountain. Even in, like, a single field of science, the literature is a huge mountain that no one person can possibly surmount all of. And there's always more added to it. And the stressor can come in, like, you just worry that you're missing so much, and that'll be fatal. So all of these things contributed to being burnt out. And, yes, that's the sideways picture of a gathering storm over the desert. It's sideways because I thought that was, like, this experience was rather disorienting. This led me to, depression, anxiety, isolation, like literally a thought that I had that's, I cringe at and is really disturbing now is, it's like, I would literally think, like, I hope I get run over by a bus today. Like, day after day after day of this thought, right? Just like, I hope this happens today. Like, I couldn't do anything active, like that was my rule. But if it just was an accident, accidents happen. You can imagine that's not, very productive. Like, it's hard to make decisions if you're stuck in that ruminative thought loop. And, made it even harder to cope well with change or uncertainty. Basically it's the mindset like anything that I did, nothing mattered, right? Nothing was ever going to change. And you can imagine like my attitude about positive thinking, in the United States, we seem to have this, like positive thinking industry that's like, just think positive and good things will happen. No, that wasn't me. Like nothing good ever happens, right? It's like that. I can't stand positive thinking. But I'll get to my present brain, which is a lot different. As opposed to being perfectionist, I tried to adopt what's called the growth mindset. That Carol Dweck is the researcher who's developed this idea. That basically everyone starts out not perfect at things, right? Like unfortunately, that's just being human. My work improves with feedback. Like I'll try something, I'll get feedback from people who are better at it than I am, or who are experts, or even non-experts can have valuable insight into whatever it is you're doing. But submit it for feedback. And you may start out really terrible. You probably will, but you can learn and improve. Like I put this flippantly is that I'm not a monk, but I don't know how social monks actually are in the real world. But, if you imagine like the cloistered vow of silence monks, that's what I'm talking about. Or those Buddhist monks who meditate in the Himalayas in isolation for years. Like, it's okay to have a life. Like it's, I'll take the weekend off from the lab, let ideas percolate in the background. And in fact, I think to some extent that makes me a better scientist. By constantly working on a problem, you don't always have a solution right there. But if you let it go for a little bit, and let it percolate in the background or just drop it for a little bit, you'll come back to it with fresh eyes and all of a sudden it's like, oh, why didn't I see that before? Well, because your brain was stressed out and you were so focused on it that you couldn't see the obvious solution. Mindfulness, self-kindness, common humanity, which are the three components of self-compassion that I mentioned before. And it can be summed up in the quote, like, I'm human, I'm not perfect, but I'll be kind to myself anyway, and when I slip up, I'll work to make it better. Be mindful of your limitations and, things that you've messed up, but don't beat yourself up over it. It's sort of the alternative view of being like, oh, I have to go flog myself for making a mistake. I try to work actively to change my habits, and I can attest that small changes really do add up over time. I'll get back to this perceived scientific culture that is out there that was certainly what I experienced. And hopefully your experience is different and more positive with it. But my experience with a lot of things was like, in science, like it has to be perfect, right? Of course, we all want things to be great and excellent and do good work. But perfect is unattainable, right? There's no definitive study on anything. There's always something more that can be added, something more to be said. We will never probably know everything about the world. But we think every single manuscript has to have every single thing in it, and we have to solve all the problems right now, and that's ridiculous. Then there's this related notion that mistakes really just are not allowed. And I imagine this could be getting worse as experiments get bigger and bigger and more expensive, and budgets get tighter and tighter. If you make a mistake, if you mess up that RNA isolation, it's fatal, and that's totally unacceptable. I don't know. Something came by and knocked that tube out of the tube rack. This notion that, you should know everything already, and don't show that you don't know something. It seemed to me like my experience of being in science for many years is that, experiments matter more than the people doing them. It's the science is what matters, not the people. And that, sort of shows up in scientific writing, like technical papers that, you very rarely see, pronouns referring to people. Although I think that might be getting a little more common. And it's just, a very sort of dehumanizing experience to say, as one individual human, I do not matter, and I fully acknowledge that. Another level, it's it sort of would be nice to be acknowledged. It's I'm important to the process. And for many, I think, again, science is improving here culturally, but I think there's a ways to go. Of course, the big one for most young scientists is these career uncertainties, right? There's only at best 20% of us who will go on to have PI positions. And there are many PIs out there still who will sort of angrily yell at you for daring to consider anything but the tenure track. Even though academia is a minority employer of PhDs, it's 80% of us go on to do something else. We're trained and spend most of our time doing exclusively research. And so how is it we're exactly supposed to explore other career fields or get the time to do that or have permission to do so? Because like it's still sort of a quietish conversation, I feel like. I want to do something else with my life. And a lot of scientists are like, what? You're going to leave? No way. That's not okay. Like people who get into science, as fabulous as we are, I've never met a scientist that's not slightly obsessive. We're very thoughtful. We strive for excellence. We're very motivated, internally motivated. And we're very critical, of whatever work we're doing. Like we try to falsify our hypotheses. And again, I'll bring up perfectionism. Like we tend to be perfectionists, right? We don't let things out the door until they are, we can say, yep, that's perfect. And a lot of this can lead to a lot of stressful thinking, right? Like just the culture, it's the mindset of a lot of scientists. Like a lot of this can be really stressful. So now I'll get to the portion where of handling stress. The bottom line is, this two-word phrase, like basically you have to do something, right? One thing to do is to reframe how you feel about stress, right? This is Kelly McGonigal on the TED stage, and she has a TED Talk about how stress is only bad if you think that it's bad for you, which is sort of a weird placebo effect mind game to play with yourself. And I'm not fully convinced, and it's not as easy as it sounds to just flip that switch saying, oh, stress is really good for me. But I encourage you to go look at the talk if you haven't seen it, and it's a really interesting idea. The big one for me personally was, sort of learning to get out of my own comfort zone. And this is a cartoon from a site called This Is Indexed, where, you have the comfort zone over here, and outside of your comfort zone is where all the magic happens. And if you reframe it for science, it's, you have your comfort zone, and the good science happens when you're actually out there pushing yourself to go further. Now, you don't have to be pushing yourself all the time. In biology, we have semi-permeable membranes. And just as long as you're pushing yourself at least every so often to make leaps, you'll be dealing with stress better. You're building resilience by doing this. So this comes back to this quote of Theodore Roosevelt, who has this line from a speech, I think, and it's called the Daring Greatly speech. And I've underlined the most important bits. What he's talking about is it's not the person that points out how the strong man stumbled. Credit belongs to the man who really was in the arena. Because any effort we make, it's not ever going to be perfect. And, even if you fail in the arena, right, if you're out there fighting, you're struggling, at least you're doing it while you're daring greatly. At least you're trying. And that is really key. Just showing up and trying new things and trying to do things, right? And it's not just in the lab. It's in your own life, too. So a lot of this might sound counterintuitive because it sounds like the solution to dealing with stress better sounds like it's to stress yourself out more. And to some extent, yes, it is. It's sort of building a muscle, right? Pushing your comfort zone, thinking of stress differently, that it's your body about to do something exciting and interesting rather than, oh my God, my body's just breaking down and about to fall apart because of stress. That seems really counterintuitive, but I guarantee you it's the case, right? You're building a resilience muscle. My own struggles with coming to this mindset are like, this sounds really kind of phrased now as woo-woo, and isn't this magical thinking? Isn't this the secret where it's just, you're just thinking positive things and good things will happen? Like, well, no, it's not. There's real, actual science behind all of this. That was what was key to me, was finding the scientifically grounded voices that seemed to be speaking positively about life. Of course, this might seem really obvious. It's like, well, yeah, life is uncertain. Like, the only constant is change. Everybody knows that. It's the most obvious truth ever. But it's really easy to lose sight of, right? That it's like, well, yeah, like you have to try things, even though, yes, life is uncertain, and it's really getting comfortable with that. In science, we like to think that we're really comfortable and good at dealing with uncertainty because that's where we exist, like testing hypotheses, building new knowledge. Like, we don't know which hypotheses are right usually. We love certainty, just like all humans, and it's really hard for us to occupy the mindset of saying, like, yeah, like, uncertainty is real and dealing with it is hard. The only thing I will say with regard to this is, like, if you're actively pushing your comfort zone, if you're making the decision to take a calculated risk of some kind, that's building your muscle instead of letting life do it for you, right? Just life will happen no matter what. But if you do the experiments yourself, you're building the muscle, so when the unexpected things happen, they don't stress you out as much, and the sky doesn't fall, and you don't get depressed and burnt out, and you handle things better and can keep doing things, in spite of whatever environment that you're in. So I'll bring up another great TED Talk that Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut, gave. What he's talking about is, the key quote is that the danger is different than the fear. The example he uses is spiders. We all fear spiders because they're creepy and weird. But the truth is, most spiders aren't dangerous. Like 99% of spiders are not dangerous to you and probably don't live near you. And most spiders don't even know that you exist. So they're not coming after you specifically. They want that nice, tasty insect. His point is, realize what the dangers are. Once you know what the dangers are and you can make a plan to deal with them, what fears does that bring up, and how do we find out what the real danger is in those fears? And by doing that in an iterative fashion, he spent 6 months in the International Space Station doing spacewalks, fixing the ISS, and doing repairs, and it allowed him to go into space from being a kid in Canada, which is an amazing journey. So handling stress, doing something is, these are some ideas that are populating the slide now that you can apply. And these are just a start to some ideas. You have to find the things that will work for you. I found these voices that resonated with me, and they all surround these concepts in some way. Probably, the two most important for me on this slide are, one, just starting, period, and showing up. And this idea that, done is better than perfect. If something's 80% there, send it out and get feedback on it, right? That is a good standard to reach. And guess what? Other people will help make it even better. Even though it's really scary to put yourself out there and your work out there, it's better to have something done than perfect. Other people can help you improve things. I'll leave you with two thoughts. Neil deGrasse Tyson did a Reddit AMA a couple of years ago, and this quote he had to a question, I really like that, his daily goals are, one, just know more about the world today than I knew yesterday, and lessen the suffering of others. And that's, that appeals to me as an educator and as a scientist, learning and lessening suffering of others, helping other people do their best work. That's very motivating to me, and that can help you push through any stress that you have. Are you actively learning something? That is literally the flip side of imposter syndrome. If you're experiencing imposter syndrome and feeling like an imposter, the other way to think of that is, you're doing something new and you're pushing yourself into a new place, and isn't that exciting? When I was at my most depressed, a friend of mine told me this phrase of just keep swimming. And related, the blogger Sarah Peck made this slide of basically, not waiting for your ship to come in, but go swim out to it. And yes, there are many complicated things I can put onto it. What if there's more than one ship out there? Which one do you swim to? And I don't know. Those are things you have to figure out. What if the water's too cold? Try and find a way to deal with that too. But all I know is, for me, it helps keep me going. Right, little inspirations like this, they may seem trite and flippant sometimes, but it's literally a reminder to yourself to keep going. And those reminders can be key and are really important. So with that, I have a list of sources that, I generated this talk from, and there are more. These are the voices that really seem to work well for me. And I guarantee, learning about how my brain works. And I guarantee you that there are voices out there that will work for you. Hopefully I've given you some ideas to take with you to start with. And I will open the floor for any questions that people have. So thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thanks, Ian. That was an excellent presentation. We have a few questions from the audience. As a reminder, again, for those listening, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our best to post them to Ian for the remainder of this webinar. kind of to kick off, Ian, you talked about, checking in with yourself. Where do you go for inspiration or to get reminders to do that?
A lot of it actually happened because of in social media. Like a lot of my Twitter feed is full of things of reminders to myself, of like Twitter accounts that are just like, okay, like one, there are people who, like I follow people who interest me, first of all, who are doing great work, who I'm like, I would like to be more like them, that whatever aspect that is. Like, it's a lot of science writers right now, but it's also like, I follow Lifehacker on Twitter, and I follow, I get their posts, which always have, like, they seem to have the tone of, like, even if it's not really relevant specifically to me, it's a reminder to just, I see the Lifehacker post, and it's a reminder, like, okay, the mindset I'm going for is resiliency, building up. A lot of times, like, it's away from the computer. For me, getting outside is huge. Like, going for a run, like, exercise is my second biggest go-to. My physical therapist just told me I can't run anymore for a little while, which is frustrating, but just even taking 5 minutes outside really helps me a lot.
Cool. And on the subject of Twitter, that's kind of interesting because, like most places on the internet, there's probably equal sources of positive and uplifting ideas about science, and also a lot of very negative stuff. So,
Yes.
How are you able to kind of parse that in your mind and stay positive about the whole experience?
I can't claim to be perfect at it, and it's hard to, like, yes, it's the internet, so there are those voices out there that are negative, but it's also important to be reminded of those sometimes, just to check in, to be like, well, yes, but, okay, a lot of it you can dismiss as being sort of ridiculous. Like, there's two sides to it, right? There are the voices that are, literally, like, speaking to your internal critic. Then there's voices out there, it's like, well, okay, am I turning into one of those, I'll say astrologers, but fit in your other woo-woo pseudoscience person? Like, am I becoming that? Like, I worry about that constantly. And then the other one is the troll voice, right, that comes in. It's like, you're doing everything wrong, it's not okay, whatever it is. To some extent, I just have to, a lot of times I pretend the troll is right and follow it to its logical conclusion and just realize, like, well, okay, maybe you have something to say, and maybe there's something there, but guess what? It might be true, but it's kind of useless to me right now. And maybe I'll incorporate it later when I've had time to think about it. Certainly, there's a double-edged sword to the internet. There's no doubt about it. But then it's also Twitter is curated, so, just follow the people who really speak to you. Like, that's possible, to really curate what you see.
Another aspect, a lot of young scientists might, find their first brush with kind of, depression and impostor syndrome, while they're in the lab in either, grad school or during a postdoc. If you find yourself in this situation, how do you work out who to go talk to?
So, okay, I really, really struggled with that for a long time, and it's why I didn't go out and seek help before I did, because it's really not clear, right? The first person I actually opened up to was probably, like, I went to go see a professional therapist, right? Because I was like, okay, something really is wrong, and I need to go check in with someone. And that was my solution. Now I have my really close friends who are mostly non-scientists that I can talk to about this stuff. I've disclosed, my struggles with depression to, like, both PIs that I've worked for, and both have actually listened. Like, I realize there are some sensitivities around bringing this up to your PI, but both of mine, I've been fortunate to have been really receptive and be, like, understanding and, really tried to work with me to figure out, okay, well, how do we solve this? So in that sense, I've been very lucky. But then, like, you can also talk to fellow grad students. Like, if you're not comfortable talking to somebody who's in your program, like, find someone who's in another program that maybe you can be friends with and be like, yeah, today really sucked. Like, so there are voices out there. Like, there are literally people on Twitter who I've never met in real life who I can talk about this stuff with, and perfectly comfortably now. It took a while to build up that relationship for sure, but all it takes is somebody saying, yeah, me too. It can be somebody who's a friend, a family member, a therapist, just like somebody who understands. And you really can talk to people. For years, my fear was always like, am I just going to spread my negativity around? Like, that is a huge fear, and why a lot of depressed people don't seek help. It's because, like, I don't want to spread this to anybody else. Like, I don't wish this on my worst enemy. Like, why would I tell someone and put them at risk too, or expose them to this? Like, it's not a good idea. Getting out of the isolation really is important. Like, you aren't by yourself. Like, there really is someone out there that you can find to talk to.
Kind of on the subject of stepping out and looking at different things, one of the key stressors you identified for young scientists especially is the aspect of careers in science. That there is very, very little information in most grad schools about anything other than the tenure track. Obviously, this is a huge stress point for a lot of young people in science. So, how would you kind of suggest to someone who they enjoy doing science, they're thinking of doing something other than the academic track, how would you kind of suggest they deal with finding out what's out there?
We live in a good era because, first of all, like, the discussion seems to be, at least there's awareness of the fact that it's a problem now, whereas, like, when I was first in grad school and as a postdoc, like, very little of this discussion existed, right, of what is it we're training ourselves for and where are we all supposed to go get jobs, because like, we all need jobs, but we only seem to be trained in science. A lot of the voices that, again, like, Twitter has been a good source of this. Sometimes Science Careers does a really good article, although like I feel like a lot of their stuff is alternate careers for scientists stuff tends to have this like, well, you're a superstar, so if you follow this exact formula perfectly, because you're a superstar, then you'll succeed. But if you're not, which guess what? I don't consider myself a superstar. So that's not very helpful. At least, like, and a lot of universities do have career offices now, I know, for PhD students specifically, and sometimes postdocs. Although there could be more of that, I realize. There are articles out there. I read several of them because I'm exploring this myself now, and like, I haven't really brought this up to my PI yet because like I'm scared to. Even though like he's sort of open to alternate careers for scientists, it's just, it's figuring out like, well, what else would I do? Like, and that's a really hard problem for a scientist to solve who's been training in science their whole life. But there are things out there. If worse comes to worse, like get together with a couple of your fellow students who are thinking along the same lines and form a group yourself, right? Like, your peers are there to help you. Like, peer review can be more than just, the reviewers for your journal articles that you're going to publish. You can say, hey, I'm having this idea. What do you think? And how could you help me, or do you know anything about this? And you can work it out together. Because part of what grad school and postdoctum ought to be, I think, is sort of finding a group of people that, share sort of a set of values that you can, call upon to work with or do projects with later on in life, like wherever they are, like whether they're in science or out of science or working for a company while you're in academia, whatever it is. This is the networking speech, right? It's like, get out there and try and meet people. And unfortunately, like me getting out and meeting people, I have not been great at, except on Twitter, which I've done fairly well at. But that speaks more to my introverted nature than anything.
Interesting, and you kind of hint a little bit there about your own state of mind and particular issues that you have different anxieties with. Something that come up a couple of times in the questions from the audience here is to do with the different personality types, and in scientific research we come across some interesting personality types. Of course,
right?
Do you think some people are more suited for some areas of science than others, or are there particular challenges that you think some personality types would, encounter that others don't?
Yes, I do. Something that I can get on a soapbox about a little bit is, in science, like the people who are in charge of the system, they were all chosen for their research. They were not chosen for their skills with managing people or managing anything really, other than, it's like, I have this scientific idea, I know how to test it within this budget, within this grant time frame, and they can write. None of it really says, like, well, the people are doing the work and you have to manage them and get them to be productive. And it's like, how do you set up a lab that, maximizes productivity? And for me, like, I work in an open lab environment, which, as one of the most introverted people on the planet, I cannot stand, especially for any sort of work I have to do at my computer, sitting at my desk in the lab. I can hear everybody talking, and it is so distracting. Like, and plugging in headphones doesn't work very well, and So I have to go to the library if I want to get any work done on my computer usually. So yes, I think that isn't a factor. Like one thing I didn't put into this was, the book Quiet that Susan Cain wrote a couple of years ago about introversion, and reading that book was a huge revelation for me. It's just like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm introverted. That's what it is. Like, for a long time I was like, why don't I talk to people more? Why don't I do things, this way? Why don't I socialize better? And I was like, well, it's just my brain is wired that way, and that's okay. Like it takes all types. Like, some of the most brilliant scientists are introverted. And so I think what is key is sort of trying to control your environment that works best for you. And you can certainly work with other people around to I don't know, like I've contemplated putting a sign on my desk at certain times of the day just being like, nope, don't talk to me. I'm trying to concentrate now. So yes, I think that is absolutely a huge thing that, science has to grapple with. This can stem into a huge discussion about diversity in science, but at the end of the day, it comes back to like, how do we get people to do their best work, like do their best science? Right now, the way the system's designed, it doesn't seem like it's best for almost anyone, but it might be one of those situations where it's like, well, it's the best except for all the others. Whatever the Winston Churchill line is about democracy, about it's like it's the worst except for all the others. We have to navigate these things, and like as science gets more professionalized and gets bigger as an enterprise and more specialized, like as teams of people have to come together to accomplish things more and more, and that's the norm now, right? You don't see many single or just like 3 author papers or whatever. Like author numbers increase now, and it's because of collaborations. And so like I think that's a huge thing to deal with, and it can be a real stressor. I don't know what to do about it exactly, other than to say like, yes, it's a real problem that I wish I had a great answer to that I don't right now. But I feel like a lot of labs could use like a professional manager to some extent.
Something else that you mentioned, and as someone who has more of a kind of an introverted outlook, you mentioned you struggle with is the necessity to socialize. For whatever career you end up in, you have to network, you have to get to know the people in the field, the people in the industry, whatever you end up doing. You've mentioned, Twitter is kind of a safe space for those of us who feel, more comfortable behind a computer screen, but ultimately you're going to have to go out and meet people in real life. What would your advice be to your average introverted grad student who only ever sees the people in their own lab?
To some extent, it goes back to the comfort zone advice of, like sometimes, you'll always have a default introverted setting that you sort of just go through most of your life with. We're all capable of extending ourselves. You don't realize how much until you actually sit there and try. Like I've come so far from, where I used to be. Like I would not be doing this webinar a couple of years ago. It's just like, you want me to do what now? Like, no, it wouldn't happen. For introverts, it's all about managing your energy. Like after this, I am going to take some quiet time to myself, and I'm going to go to the gym and plug in a podcast tonight and, just work out and not be distracted by anything. That's one thing. It's, like get up for the social interactions that really matter. Twitter really is a game changer for introverted people, right? Like social media is our platform that we were waiting to have to really get our voices out into the world. I like to write, like I have my blog that I write on, but like I also I keep a journal, things like that. And like it is all about giving yourself recovery time. And like, consider it a success if you actually talk to one person at a conference or whatever, like, at a certain session. Like if you talk to that one person and made a real genuine connection, and that's what networking is, in case anyone in the audience isn't aware. For years, the definition of networking to me was schmoozing and being gross and like small talk, like, No. Networking, make a genuine connection with another human being. And I guarantee you that is possible with at least one other person at whatever event. And it is a stretch to like push yourself to go sometimes. And like sometimes I have to really force myself out, but I'm usually rewarded when I do so. That's the other thing. Introverts need people too. It's not like we're loner isolationists. Those are some of my ideas. And there are like, if you want to talk about like a field where you wouldn't expect to find introverts, like it's in entrepreneurs, like who found businesses, and you expect them to be out there hitting the pavement, like selling, being really aggressive. Well, on Twitter there are a number of entrepreneurs who are very introverted, and they write all about this stuff. Like, this is literally their field of figuring out, how do I function as an introvert, as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur. Like, one is Beth Belo, who's the introvert coach on Twitter, and you can look her up, and she has a blog and a whole business, and she has some great ideas about how to go about networking as an introvert.
Cool. And you've mentioned some of the ways you control your stress. You mentioned exercise and such. Something that's got one of the questions coming in is, have you ever tried any, alternative, non-traditional methods such as teas and meditation or whatever? Is it?
Sure. So yes, I have actually. I tried to be a habitual meditator, and I have not fully succeeded yet. Like, I tried to have little, like, mindful moments. Like, if I'm driving, I try to be really aware of the fact that I'm driving. And, like, occasionally
I get up.
Right. Right. Well, yes, exactly. Almost to the exclusion of anything else, right? It's just, like, I'm aware that I'm driving, like, I'm breathing, it's a meditative state. Like, you're paying attention, but you're really aware of what you're doing right then, and you're noticing everything around you. Or, like, doing the dishes is a good time for me to just sort of enter the meditative state. And, like, meditation really works. Like, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about, Buddhists were aware of this stuff thousands of years ago. It's, like, suffering and stress. Like, they're like, well, it's because you have attachment to things. That's it. That's what causes suffering. It's wishing things to be other than they are. And I have adopted some of that mindset, and I have tried meditation. Like, a cup of tea is great for relaxation, I find, at the end of the day. Like, I don't do, like, if you're talking about, like, like a full-on, like, Japanese tea ceremony, no, I don't do that. There's certainly power in having a ritual to, go to recharge, to refresh yourself. A lot of times, like, running gets me into a meditative state, too. Those things work. And, like, look, if you're really depressed, like, Andrew Solomon has a great TED Talk about how he overcame depression and was, like, and he has heard from people, like, he wrote a book about this, and he cites some examples of people who wrote him in about some of their alternative ideas, like this one lady who makes little, like, bauble, like, trinket things or something as a treatment for depression. She's like, yeah, this makes me feel better. And he's like, well, more power to you. Meditation, like, there's real science behind that one. Like, having rituals, there's real science behind how rituals help people be, healthier. So, like, there's a way of going about this stuff that's not entering into the pseudoscience realm, right? And, like, again, this has always been my huge worry of becoming, like, it's like, am I an astrologer now? Like, I hope not. Yeah, so yes, I have tried them. Like, I think, it's great if you can do that. Meditation, like, especially, is really good, but I can do 5 minutes at a time well. And other than that, it's just incorporating it into my day-to-day activities.
We've concentrated a little bit on kind of internal stresses, how you deal with your own anxieties and your own issues. In life, one of the most common sources of stress is other people. And
yes, it is.
Quite often the people who are appointed above one. What advice do you have for people who have a boss who's overbearing or a PI who is a ridiculous perfectionist and have a lot of pressure-related stress on them?
Again, like, I wish I had the answer for this one, and I don't. But I've heard a couple of PIs talk about how whenever a new student or a postdoc first starts in the lab, they have a discussion with that student or postdoc about, okay, here's the plan for us working together. Like, it's sort of, here's how we manage one another, basically. It's that kind of contract where you work out sort of ahead of time, being like, here's how I like to work, here's how I like to work. Like, as much as it would be great to, like, wave a wand and be able to just change someone instantly, that usually has a bad result in the end. The best I can say is, like, you try and open a dialogue with them and being like, hey, how we're working together isn't working for me, and I wonder if we could talk about that. Maybe try broaching the subject a little bit with them. Some PIs might be set in their ways. I don't know. It might be hard to change some minds, but I don't think it hurts to try, because ultimately, like, you can explain the goal is like, look, I want to do the best possible work for you, and right now this isn't helping me do that. Like, I don't, it's not the easiest discussion to have maybe, but it's, a way of framing it that the PI being like, oh, wait a second, I do want to get the best work out of you while you're here. Because guess what? You're not going to be a PhD student or a postdoc forever in their lab. And ideally, the PI has not self-interest, but also cares about people in their employ to help them do their best work. So, anything you can help to aid that process of being like, hey, our working relationship isn't quite working with me. And, again, like, that is a risky thing to do. Like that, talk about daring greatly. Like that is, a huge comfort zone push. I realize in some cases, things like that are the way to go about that. And sometimes, you can work around things and not worry about them. But I think a lot of PIs would probably be very open to that kind of dialogue. Like I know a couple are at least. And I think it's probably getting more and more common as, awareness about these kinds of things spreads, about, what the issues are of the mental health of the scientific workforce, which is not great, by the way, according to survey data.
So I think we have time for one final question. It actually relates very much to where you left off there. And, when we talk about mental health with the greatest will in the world, and, issues like anxiety and depression never fully, go away entirely. So how do you stay motivated every morning, even when it's a cold, dark day and you feel like crap? How do you get yourself up and go to the lab?
Yep. So, I try to have one goal for the day that, I will accomplish this one thing at least today. Like this, however small it might be. It took me years to hit upon this, and for years I would show up at work and I was not motivated, and it was very hard. Now, I have a to-do list that, I put usually 3 to 5 things on it, only 2 big things that I would like to get done today. The big thing on my list today was doing this webinar. That helps a lot for me is, and then again, it's about managing your energy, right? It is getting a good night's sleep. It is getting up in the morning. To some extent in academia, we're lucky because we can sort of control our schedules. There are some days where it's yeah, I just need to work at home today. And that's possible for me to do. But, taking mental health days, especially, it's okay to take a weekend day to recharge your batteries and do the life things that you've been neglecting all week. Yeah, for me, it is literally a managing energy strategy. And, it's motivating because I stay motivated by just, it's I'm motivated to show up and solve, my career, what I consider a career problem right now, and that, I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but I need to solve it. And that is very motivating to me.
Excellent. So that brings us to the end of today's seminar. Thank you again, Ian, for an excellent presentation, a really great discussion. Finally, thank you to the audience for taking the time to attend and listen in. If you have enjoyed this seminar and would like to view the video recording, please visit the seminars page on bitesizebio.com. It should be available within the next 24 hours. There you will also see the other webinars we've lined up for you in Bitesize Bio's Webinar Festival. So until next time, good luck in your research, and goodbye from all of us at Bitesize Bio.